This is WCRN Weekend with your host, Pat Rice.
Welcome to the show, me lad and lasses. Another episode with your host, Pat Rice. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Where's me pot of gold in my bottle of whiskey? Oh, no, I'm not going to be talking that way throughout this whole episode. But happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. If you're out there having your festivities or if you're just curing a hangover, please be safe and take it easy because you want to be able to do it next year or maybe tomorrow night. Well, anyways, we got a very special guest on the line. Let's get right to it. Randall Bird is a co-host entitled as the Master of Whiskey on WCRN's show It's the Liquor Talkin' with host Ryan Maloney, owner of Julio's Liquors, out in Westboro on 140 Turnpike Road. Now, Julio's Liquors is a 20,000 square foot paradise for any drink connoisseur or person looking to try something new every single time or just get the regular. There's over 3,000 wine labels, 1,000 beers in stock with a variety of classic, high-end, and hard-to-find spirits, from scotch to whiskey, vodkas and gins. Julio also has the world-famous Jim Beam Cold Storage Warehouse, which is a vintage spirits tasting room, and is also the home studio for CRN's show, It's the Liquor Talking, which is a great, entertaining, and informative show about all different kinds of spirits, which airs every Saturday at 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Randall, thank you for calling into the show.
My pleasure to be here.
What do you plan on doing for your St. Patrick's Day?
Well, I don't think I can really tell you over the air, but if you check the police blotters after St. Patrick's Day, you'll pretty much figure out what my activities are.
Okay.
But I really like to try and do a lot of Irish whiskey tasting. It's the big time of the year, of course, for anything Irish, but Irish whiskey is a particular passion of mine. And that's what I'll be concentrating on during St. Patrick's Day and the days leading up to it.
That's the way to go. We should have the whole week off for this holiday.
I agree. I think that's what should happen.
And so how long have you been involved with the whiskey spirit scene?
So over 20 years, and I've done a lot of the trips for Julio's Liquors and the Lock and Key Society, but also trained in Scotland, Ireland, Kentucky, done work in Canada, even Taiwan, as far as trying to learn as much as I can about whiskey and also enjoy it and share that information with other people. That's why I do the radio show as well.
Wow. So you've been nationwide. That's incredible. So you've tried whiskeys from all over the world.
Yes. And we're seeing now that more whiskeys from around the world are becoming popular, as well as bourbons, which are from the United States, really kind of starting to pop as well.
I was going to ask, do you see whiskey gaining more popularity nowadays? Because it seems like everyone's drinking a whiskey and cola, or just, it seems to be more prevalent.
There was a downturn in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when whiskey was not as popular. But that has turned around, and now you're seeing double-digit growth in what they call the brown spirits, which includes whiskeys and brandies and aged products like tequila, across the board over the last 5 or 6 years. It really has become a kind of a hip thing. And now all the companies have had to ramp up their production to make more of the juice, more of the whiskey or the tequila or whatever it is, in order to meet the demand, because so many people are starting to get into it, learn about it, and enjoy it. So it's booming now, but there was a period not too long ago when it was kind of in a slump. Actually, whiskey was cheaper and more available, but now it's become kind of a thing. It's a little bit of a fad. People are enjoying it everywhere, and Irish whiskey, as we approach St. Patrick's Day, is extremely popular with double-digit growth over the last few years as people are really enjoying a lot of the Irish whiskeys, whether it's with their coffee or with a mixed drink or just straight and neat in the glass.
So it's really a booming industry. And before we really get into that, when did you have your first sip of whiskey?
Well, I really started to get kind of into or turned on to the category in 1993. Even though I may sound young, I was at least 21 years old at that point as well. So
Nice. Not too long ago, it's not whiskey, but I read something about tequila that somewhere, I don't know if it was exactly in Mexico, but they're running out of a certain ingredient to make a certain tequila. Have you heard anything about that?
Yeah, so agaves are difficult to grow because they are typically grown wild, but also take a very long time to grow. So if tequila became super popular like it did, they would have to ramp up with what the growth time is for the agave. And also, the second part of that is that tequilas that are aged in ex-bourbon barrels. And so the availability of bourbon barrels, because of the slump, they didn't have as many kind of kicking around. That now has been addressed, and you'll see in the future years that they'll be able to have more barrels to age the whiskey after they've been used for bourbon, and also trying to plant and harvest more agave, although the agave has a multiple-year timeline to grow. It's not like corn that you can grow in one season.
How long does it usually take to grow agave?
Well, certain agaves can be a growing period up to 9 to 12 years.
Wow.
And often are only found in the wild. But the Weber Blue agave, which is what they use for tequila, I would say that it has an average of 3 to 4 years to get to full harvest size. So if you decide it becomes really popular in the next 2 years, you have not planted that many or can't harvest that many from a 4-year time, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. You can definitely run into problems with that if you don't have enough supply.
Yep.
How long does it take to create a barrel or a batch of fine whiskey, and what are some of the most necessary ingredients?
Well, whiskey is really kind of unique. Despite what Fireball would tell you, because they add cinnamon flavor to their whiskey,
Yep.
you can't add artificial flavor to most technically, legally described whiskeys. So the ingredients are usually a grain, which they call a cereal grain, like corn, barley, rye, and water and yeast are generally the only ingredients that are allowed in what they call the mash bill or the recipe of grains. They make a beer, and then they distill the beer by boiling it to condense the alcohol and remove the water. So all whiskeys are a kind of intense beer without a lot of water. And the last part of the project that the beers don't do is they put it into an oak cask for it to age. So you can get through the fermentation process just like you could make a beer in probably under a week. But to age it in a barrel can take a year to 2 years. In Scotland, it's a minimum of 3 years. Depends around the world what their basic requirements are or their legal qualifications are. But you're looking at several years at least that it sits in a barrel just aging and taking on color and flavor from the barrel.
We'll be right back with Weekends with Pat Rice on AM 830.
Now, WCRN Weekend continues. Once again, here's your host, Pat Rice.
We have been talking with Randall Bird from WCRN's show, It's the Liquor Talkin', which also has Ryan Maloney as the host. We've been talking about a variety of different whiskeys and spirits in general. Are brands like, let's say, Jack Daniel's and Crown Royal, do they use artificial flavoring with their whiskeys? Like Fireball might add in the extra sugar and the cinnamon flavor.
Yeah, so each brand, because, I'm not trying to say something negative about Fireball.
Oh, no,
People have tasted Fireball and then brought to the whiskey category because you get a taste of the whiskey at the same time that you get the taste of the cinnamon. So Jack Daniel's has a honey-infused product. Crown Royal has an apple and a maple kind of infused product. And so they're putting those flavors in, but they're taking it out of the strict whiskey category, and they're making essentially a flavored whiskey. For most people, it's a subtle distinction. Fireball is whiskey with flavor added, but the technical legal definition for whiskey in the United States is that as soon as you add something to the flavor, artificially, like cinnamon, add it to the process, it no longer becomes a whiskey. So it becomes confusing, I think, to people who are drinking it. They just know that they love the taste of it.
Exactly. Wow, I never knew that. So what are some brands that are just strictly whiskey, like some that would be the official definition of a whiskey, and that could do with Irish whiskey as well, with no additives to it?
That's almost everything is going to have no additives to it. So, of course, the big one for Ireland and St. Patrick's Day coming up is Jameson, but also Tullamore Dew, Bushmills, Glendalough, West Cork Distillers. These are all pretty famous distilleries that don't add adjuncts or flavor into their whiskey just from the process. And then in Scotland, virtually everything that you know of, with the exception of Drambuie, they do not add flavor or adjuncts to the whiskeys. Sometimes they can add a small amount of essentially food coloring, caramel coloring, just to make sure that the bottles all look the same shade or hue. It gets a little bit weird if you're looking at a bunch of bottles on a shelf and they're all different colors, but they're the same exact taste. So they're allowed to add a little bit of color to add that in there to make it consistent. And then in the United States, like just name any of the great bourbons or ryes, they're not adding it. So Jim Beam, Evan Williams, Jack Daniels, Buffalo Trace, Blanton's, all the big names. Tennessee whiskeys, you have Jack Daniels, you have George Dickel. So all of those not adding flavor. They will specifically mention on there if there's a flavor added.
Yeah.
A Bird Dog, which is making a whiskey, adds a peach flavor, for instance, and it'll say peach-flavored whiskey.
What's the difference between dark and lighter whiskey? Like, using Jack Daniels as an example, again, that's more of a darker whiskey compared to like a Jameson, which kind of comes out lighter and like looks like a ginger ale-like color.
So if you're getting all your color from the barrel, and the barrel is kind of like a tea bag, the first time you use that barrel, you're going to pour a lot of color and flavor into the wood. And Jack Daniels is using first-use barrels. In Scotland and Ireland, they will use the barrel after they've used it in the United States. And so a lot of the color and flavor has been leached out, so they have to age it generally a little bit longer to get that color and flavor, and it's usually a little bit lighter and not as intense with the flavors as the American whiskeys that require by law to have a virgin cask that once they use it, they have to sell the cask.
How come there's a law for that?
Well, there's some lawmakers that in 1938 decided that they owned a lot of oak forest and they wanted to sell a lot of barrels. So they didn't want the distilleries to keep reusing the barrels. They wanted to keep selling more barrels, more wood to them. And so they put a law in the United States that says that you have to use a virgin cask. Once you make the bourbon, you can sell that barrel to a rum company or to a tequila company or an Irish whiskey company, but they cannot use it to make whiskey in the United States again.
Oh, wow.
Unless it meets some very, very weird kind of requirements like a corn whiskey, but very few people drink corn whiskey. They prefer bourbon, which is still a corn whiskey, but it's a special type of corn whiskey.
Now, what's a title that would be just strictly corn whiskey?
It's corn whiskey, but it doesn't specify. You can use a recast, but most people think of corn whiskey as closer to moonshine. That may or may not be a good way to describe it, but a lot of people think of corn whiskey, which is at least 51% corn in the mash bill and does not have to have a virgin cask, as being a little bit inferior. I disagree with this, but that's what most people think. And then a bourbon, which is at least 51% corn, requires a virgin charred oak cask, and everybody wants the bourbon name attached because people think of it as a higher quality and spend more money on it.
And
you can find some great values and tastes in corn whiskey. Mellow Corn is a pretty famous one, 50% ABV, and it's bottled in bond, which is a government standard, so it's like a little higher proof strength. Like I said, a lot of people look at it, it's a paler yellow color because it's not that first-use cask, and they kind of pass over it.
In the end, which whiskey would you say is higher quality? I mean, it's both whiskey, but since people pass over to it just because of the color, or it's using the second barrel?
It's kind of a trick question. Whatever you like is the best whiskey. And I personally like a lot of the stuff that's affordable and that you can find everywhere. I love Jim Beam White Label. I like Evan Williams Black Label. And I use a lot of those to make mixed drinks. But if you're spending more money, like $100 on a bottle or $60 on a bottle, I like to have that taste kind of stand out on its own a little bit. But there's nothing to say that that's better unless you like it better. Most people, I could buy something that's more expensive and they would love to have, if they're mooching off me and trying to drink all my whiskey for free, they want the expensive stuff. But there's nothing wrong with the other stuff. It's just as good. It's just a different kind of flavor profile.
Exactly. I mean, to me, if it's whiskey, I'll drink it. But
right.
What are some great whiskey mixes or recipes that you have for especially the St. Patrick's weekend coming up?
I really like the flavor of whiskey, so what I try and do is make it easy to access the taste of the whiskey. So a lot of them, like you were saying, like a whiskey and cola, a very famous one is, Jack and Coke.
Yeah.
But it could be any type of whiskey, goes pretty well with that cola taste. And then the other one I like is ginger. So a ginger ale or ginger beer with a whiskey, any of the bourbons, is a pretty tasty, quick, easy-to-do cocktail. And a lot of the mixologists and bartenders are going to have their crazy recipes with their very crazy kind of ingredients, their bitters that they make, and their special process that they do it.
Yeah.
But I like to keep it simple, and I like to have the whiskey kind of pop through on the flavor, so I don't try and hide it behind too many other flavors. I like it neat and on the rocks, and I also like it with a little splash of ginger ale or that Coke to just kind of give me a little bit more of a sweeter flavor to balance some of the spices that you sometimes get in whiskey.
Definitely. for like Irish coffees, what are some whiskeys that you use to make Irish coffees? Because I know if people are mixing their liquor with their coffee, they use something like Bailey's, which is pretty much just a creamer with a little bit of alcohol in it.
You have whiskeys that have cream in them. Bailey's, Carolyn's. There's many others.
Oh wow, I didn't know that
not just those two.
I didn't know Bailey's was whiskey. Wow.
Yeah, it's whiskey based. So you wouldn't call it whiskey because they've added the kind of cream or milk product to it. But there are several of those, and those are pretty easy to put into a coffee because they already have some of that cream or that milk in them. But if you're talking about just adding a straight whiskey, any of the Irish whiskeys are a natural pairing. And because the coffee is going to have such a strong aroma and flavor, you're going to want to have something that's probably not the most expensive whiskey that you can buy, because you're going to kind of drown out some of the whiskey flavor by the overpowering coffee flavor. So I like to do stuff that you can get off the shelf or that is pretty easy. Jameson White Label, Bushmills, their regular expression, Tullamore Dew is fantastic and a very, very good price point. So those are some of the ones that are easy to find and that you can throw right into your coffee and make a little bit of an Irish celebration for St. Patrick's Day.
We'll be right back with Weekends with Pat Rice on AM 830.
You're listening to WCRN Weekend. Once again, here's your host, Pat Rice.
What would you say is the cheapest whiskey that you can get off the shelf? And what would you say is the most expensive?
It's going to kind of depend on what people have as a price special. Mm-hmm. So the cheapest whiskey that you're going to probably find, and I'll be a little bit wary of anything that's really too far below the $20 mark, but you can get some good $20 whiskeys, bourbons, Irish, all that, up to the most expensive bottles of whiskey, which recently I was kind of working with some 40-year-old Macallan that was probably about $7,000-8,000 a bottle.
Oh my
God.
I
mean, the range is huge. But most people are going to be comfortable spending in the $30 to $35 range for bourbons, mm-hmm. and probably closer to the $50 range for Scotch whiskeys. And Irish whiskeys are going to be a little bit between both of those. So I would look to spend between $30 and $50, and you get a really nice bottle of Irish whiskey. And if you're spending a little bit less, do your Irish coffee, make some of your Irish kind of desserts or things like that with it, and you're getting a good value and still that whiskey taste.
Perfect. And what's the best stout that a customer can find at Julio's?
I think that you can get some good coffee stouts for right around now. Jameson's has something called a cask mate, which is a stout barrel that has held beer that they've aged the whiskey in as well.
So it's a beer, you said? A beer and a whiskey in one?
Whiskey that's been aged in a beer barrel.
Oh, okay.
So there's no beer sloshing around, but Caskmate's stout. And then they also have an IPA barrel that they've used. Those are both things that if people love craft beer and beers, mm-hmm. and would like to try and get some whiskey, they could do that as well.
Oh, wow, that's incredible. I never knew that. And you guys have a couple of tasting rooms over at Julio's. What are some of the spirits that you have available at the Jim Beam Cold Storage Warehouse tasting room?
We have anything that you're going to have open for people to taste. We'll have a bottle open in that tasting room. Now, you can't just walk in and pour yourself a huge glass. But if you talk to somebody here and you're asking about bourbons, we have probably about 15 to 20 bottles open that you could taste. If you're talking about Irish whiskeys, we're going to have a bunch of those bottles. Even tequilas, gins, vodkas, any of the spirits, which are the distilled products that have the higher alcohol content. But they also have open bottles of wine and many of the beers open and available for people to try. The motto here is try before you buy. The more you know, the better you drink. So get a little bit of an education and learn some of the stuff and try some things and make up your mind instead of me trying to pick out what I think you like, which may be completely different from what your taste buds are telling you.
Yeah, that's the way it should be, because I was going to ask for what spirit would you recommend for a first-timer, but it seems like it's all about the person that's tasting the drink on what their taste buds want, and at the end of the day, what they like. Because like what you said, what you like might be completely different to what the next guy likes.
Correct. But, Irish whiskey is a great place to start. It's not have the intense spiciness or really kind of harsh, earthy, smoky flavors that some scotches might have. And it's not as definitely woody or vanilla forward as a bourbon. So it's kind of a nice middle-of-the-road place to start. Really light, sweeter notes, some good flavor in the whiskeys, and it's still all whiskey. But whiskey from Ireland, even if it's not St. Patrick's Day, is a great place to start.
I agree. Nothing like a Jameson and ginger. One of my go-tos. And so do you guys have any wine, beer, whiskey tasting events coming up? Traveling around, sharing the whiskey, when and where?
Yeah, every Wednesday night there's a free whiskey tasting. And I believe Tuesday nights they try and do a wine tasting and a wine education class. And then Thursday nights or Monday nights can be beer nights. So if you check on the calendar, which is juliasliquors.com, you can see upcoming events. There is no cost to looking at these events. And generally speaking, most of the events are free. They ask that people try and sign up for some of the spots. But anybody that wanted to attend and taste and learn about these different products can do that at Julio's for free.
That's terrific. And I see that you guys have all Irish whiskeys for 10% off. Is it just for this weekend?
Yes, that'll be through, I think, Sunday. But, of course, we're trying to get people a chance to try some different Irish whiskeys. And we do have a few of those open for people to sample. And if you come into the store, especially on Friday and Saturday, they're going to have people from the different companies that have made these whiskeys sometimes have some of the tasting tables up right after the work hours or midday on Saturday to let people taste it. And, of course, if you stop by our table when we're broadcasting It's the Liquor Talking from 11 to 1, we also have samples open, and we're happy to talk to people on our commercial breaks.
It sounds like one big expo to me. This is really terrific stuff.
If you haven't been down here, it's really hard to describe it. People think they know what they're going to deal with it, but when they get into the store, it's completely kind of mind-blowing. There's a huge classroom downstairs that seats up to 100 people that they do the presentations at. There's kind of neat tasting rooms. You can get a little tasting card. Even if you don't want to be bugged by a salesperson, you can walk up and taste small amounts of the wines, for instance. They have dispensers that you put the card in, and it pours out a small sample, and you can try some different wines before you buy it.
Wow.
And I'll do it all on your own without somebody leaning over your shoulder trying to push a sale on you or anything like that. So, yeah.
Has there ever been a time where there's someone that just doesn't leave? I feel like if I went in there, that's like paradise for someone that, enjoys having a drink or just trying new stuff.
Yeah, I think that I'd have to say that almost everyone that comes here does it responsibly. Of course, we're going to pour a few samples, but we want people to get home safe and have a great experience. And there's always the opportunity to come back and try a little bit more at a distant or future point in time. So you can keep trying and keep learning and keep growing your taste buds and sense of smell and enjoying the stuff. But we don't like to do it as kind of a drunk fest or anything where people are going to be hurt or endangering themselves or others.
Exactly. Always drink responsibly. Though, St. Patrick's Day has gained a reputation where people might go overboard. So for fun, for your advice, if someone drank too much after St. Patrick's Day, what are some of the best hangover cures for those people, mostly probably college students or someone that just doesn't really know how to handle themselves? What would you recommend?
So the one thing that is going to help along the process, and there is no real cure for a hangover, despite what everyone has their little personal recipes, is to do as much water as possible. And that will help kind of flush your system out. So even while you're drinking the night before, if you're drinking a lot of water along with the alcohol, that will help with the hangover. And then the next day, trying to clean out your system or drink as much water as possible to kind of deal with rinsing out or flushing out your system.
Definitely. And so for anyone that wants to get into the beer and spirits industry, what advice do you have to offer them?
You got to learn, and you have to be knowledgeable because there are so many people that are already knowledgeable. So come on down and try and take some classes, ask the questions, try and learn as much as you can. And then all these classes and a lot of the tables that are set up for sampling on the weekends, for instance, have the people that work for these industries. And they're the ones that would be able to tell you about job opportunities or way that you might be able to take your love or passion of spirits, wine, or beer and turn it into something that may pay for a part-time job or even a career, as it has for me.
Would you ever open your own liquor store or create your own brand of whiskey and beer?
Yeah, I don't know if I would do a store, but I've definitely distilled, and I'm interested in working on some projects with some craft distillation. And I also own some kind of equipment design patents on distillation still designs and equipment. So, yeah, I'm very positively interested in that stuff and participating in it, but it's nothing that's right now I'm doing full time. It's going to be in the future.
Cool. That's wonderful. And if you would like, how can people reach out to you and discover more about It's the Liquor Talking?
So there's It's the Liquor Talking Facebook page, and also just come into the store and listen to it on WCRN AM 830. It's from 11 to 1 on a live broadcast. And easier than that is there's a free podcast, Apple iTunes download podcast, every Monday after the broadcast that gets published, that you can listen to in your car or on your way to work or whenever you have some free time, maybe you're working out. And I always say, if you ever have trouble sleeping, 5 minutes of listening to the podcast will knock you right out. I'll put you right to sleep.
Hey, once again, I'd like to thank you for joining our show today, Randall. You have an extensive knowledge on a variety of spirits and within the industry in general. Ryan Maloney has an incredible establishment over there at Julio's Liquors. And like we've been saying, if you're looking for a liquor store to go to, stop on by at Julio's Liquors, right off of Route 9 in Westboro on 140 Turnpike Road. We've been talking with Randall Bird, part of It's the Liquor Talking, the master, wizard of whiskey. Trust his taste buds, everyone, and try